Hello, I'm John Perry, and welcome to Gary Glenn Reports with Representative Gary Glenn. Representative, welcome. Nice to talk to you.
Good to see you again this week, John.
Good to see you, too. There is a lot to talk about as we sit down here today. Let's start with talking about roads. Obviously, out there on the radar is the May 5th vote on Proposal 1. We won't get into that here. This isn't the forum for swaying people one way or another.
Right.
But you do have legislation that has now been introduced in the Michigan House of Representatives. Some people have called it a Plan B. Some people are saying there needs to be something in place.
Right. I have introduced what I call the Bolger Plan. It was introduced by the Speaker of the House, Jase Bolger, last year. Let's acknowledge that he attempted to pass this. It did not pass, and he has subsequently endorsed what's on the ballot. So let's be fair to Jase in that respect. But nonetheless, it was the Bolger Plan. It's verbatim what he introduced last year, which passed the House of Representatives with a very solid bipartisan majority. I think it would not be responsible of the 148 legislators not to have a Plan B. We're told how urgent it is to fix our roads, and yet everybody's sitting around waiting another 2 months until May 5th to find out what happens. The polls seem to indicate that the ballot measure doesn't look like it has that great a chance of passing. So I think it is very responsible and prudent of us to have Plan B, C, D, E, and F waiting in the wings if we don't do anything beforehand. So the Bolger Plan from last legislative session would remove the gas tax from gas and replace it with a use tax, and one would phase out, the other would phase in, so that it was revenue neutral. It does not increase taxes, and yet it will reallocate from other portions of the budget so that we produce $1.2 billion a year for road repair, which is the amount the governor says is needed to catch up, and do so without raising taxes. Other areas of the budget would be affected, but they would not be cut. They just might not get as high of an increase. I like to characterize it as Washington, D.C. math. When you get $10 billion this year, you ask for $15 billion the next year, and you only get $14 billion, and you call that a $1 billion cut instead of what it really is in the rest of the world's math is a $4 billion increase. Well, in the same way, you may not get as big of an increase in other areas of the budget, but you're still going to get an increase. And let me say specifically that there are 2 paragraphs in the bill which by the express wording of the bill say, for example, it would not be possible under the plan I'm proposing for our public schools or cities and counties and townships and villages, either one, to get less in any given year than they got the year before.
And that's a question that always comes up.
That's right, on this particular bill. But at any year, our school districts, for example, were to get less money than they did the year before, then this entire proposal would reverse itself. The sales tax would go back on gas. The money flow would be reestablished to hold our public schools harmless. But if, in fact, it is a matter of public safety that we fix our roads and repair our bridges, then we're going to act like it's a priority and reallocate the existing resources to that priority and raise $1.2 billion a year for road repair without raising additional taxes, without taking additional money out of the pockets of hardworking taxpayers across Michigan. So I meant to illustrate one thing. There is a Plan B. I believe there are plans C, D, E, and F. It is not all or nothing in terms of what's coming up on the May 5th ballot. And I think you'll see other proposals come forth, perhaps in the House, also in the state Senate. And a county commissioner from Washtenaw County contacted me and said that just under the existing millage authority of local governments, he had calculated that if all the local governments across Michigan were to place on the ballot or impose millages to the maximum amount allowed under the caps, that would raise another $800 million for roads, for local road repair, without the state having to allocate anything additional. So there are other options that are before us. I signed a pledge that I was not going to support raising taxes on the people of Michigan. And so this is a proposal I think is responsible, prudent, passed the House with a bipartisan, very strong support last year, didn't get voted on in the Senate, but this is one of the virtues of term limits, in my opinion, John. The last cast of legislators in the House and the Senate couldn't come to an agreement, but now the deck's been reshuffled by term limits. At least a third of us are new in the House, and so I think it's responsible for us to see what this new cast of characters could come up with. I guess on May 6th at worst, if not before, but at least my proposal and others will be sitting ready on the table for consideration at that point.
Representative, let's talk too about tax credits. Actually, shortly after you were elected in 2014, we started to hear about some of the mega tax credits and how they were impacting the state's budget for the current fiscal year, 2015, and for 2016 as well. There are estimates those liabilities could top $9.3 billion going out to, what, 2032, so a long way into the future. You and a colleague have been working on legislation. Is it fair to say that make sure that those credits are not amended or extended?
That's a very sobering figure when our budget is $53 billion, to find that we have $9 billion in tax credits that are kind of hanging out there, and we aren't sure when they're going to come due, when they're going to be submitted.
They're unpredictable, aren't they?
And in 2011, the public policy decision was already made that it was not smart to continue to hand these out. So that's already a decision that seems to be set. What's at issue now are the contracts that were already entered into, first under the Engler administration in return for creating new jobs, and then under the Granholm administration expanded to include the retention of existing jobs. On the one hand, it's positive news for our economy that we've either created or retained jobs, or else the tax credits couldn't be claimed because these were contractual obligations into which major employers agreed. We're either going to create or retain jobs. In return, we get a tax credit. So on the one hand, it's good news for our economy that jobs have been created or retained, that our tax base is benefiting from the people who are employed, who may get pay raises, they're paying income tax, they're buying things, and there's sales tax. And our economy benefits from that even if the tax credits aren't submitted for 2 more years down the road. So on the one hand, there's a positive aspect to this. On the other hand, $9 billion in debt hanging out there that we owe to the people who contracted to create or retain jobs is a sobering number.
If you're a family, a business, it would be very hard to budget with that type of unpredictability out there.
Especially, and that's what we have to address. I think if there's anybody at fault here, it's certainly not the employers that have created jobs or retained jobs, but I think in terms of our ability to manage that number, we need greater transparency from the Department of Treasury. We need more notice. We need to know as quickly as they know, and that apparently is where the fall down occurred. But the legislation that I'm going to be introducing says that for the existing tax credits, we're not handing out any more, but for the ones that are currently under contract, that they cannot be opened and renegotiated to either expand the figure even beyond $9.3 billion or to extend them past 2032, which is a long way. We're going to be wrestling with this problem in our budget.
A lot can happen in 17 years.
That's right. For 17 more years, I don't want to make it 34. So we're going to have a piece of legislation. Now, is there some possibility for a sunset provision in the legislation? Anything's possible. Might that amendment come up in committee? Anything is possible. But the way the bill starts out is to say that none of the existing contracts can be renegotiated to bring more liability on the taxpayers of Michigan or to have the taxpayers of Michigan liable for that $9.3 billion longer than 2032. It gives us a cutoff both at the $9.3 billion figure and the 2032 point on the calendar.
Bottom line, as you say, ultimately it is Michigan taxpayers who are liable. They need to be protected.
They do need to be protected. I think the overwhelming sentiment here in Lansing is they need to be protected now so that it doesn't get any worse in terms of the dollar amount or how long taxpayers are going to be liable. Someone jokingly said to me the other day that as opposed to other bills I may introduce, this one looks like it might go all the way. My understanding is the governor's office is supportive of this legislation, and leadership on the tax policy committee on which I sit is supportive. I believe House leadership is supportive. So it may be that this is going to be a piece of legislation I've introduced that actually becomes law. We'll find out in the weeks ahead. But it is a reflection of a pretty strong sentiment right now that we've got to get a handle on these tax credits.
Because after all, 17 years is a long time. Currently, there would be no guarantee.
That's true.
10 years down the road when one of your successors is in office, and those tax credits still have 7 years to run, that someone might try something in 2025.
Yep, that's true. And I do want to say this, because when I was running for this position, John, I said that my focus was going to be on what would make Michigan more competitive, more attractive to new investment, new business and industry. And I think having a budget process that is predictable and manageable is an element in that, and to be caught off guard like we were at the end of 2014 with the tax credits that came due, that is not a stable situation. I would observe this as well. I'm a freshman. I've been in this position now for 2 months, and committee leadership and other leaders in the House came to me and asked me to carry this bill. So I'm gratified by that. I think it's a reflection of the fact that I'm being successful in developing positive relationships with not only new members, but those who have been here before me. We have a Speaker of the House, Kevin Cotter, who's right next door, my seatmate from Midland County. Have a great relationship with Kevin. I think he's doing a great job as Speaker of the House. But the fact that I'm being asked to carry bills that are important to the entire leadership of the legislature, I think is certainly gratifying. And it's my commitment to continue in that path so that I can be as effective as possible for the people of Bay and Midland counties.
Representative, we're going to take a break right now, but we'll be back with Gary Glenn Reports in just a moment. And we're back with Gary Glenn Reports. Representative, the last time we visited, we were talking about legislation that would eliminate the state's film and movie credits at October of 2015. That legislation has since been up for a vote in the House of Representatives. What happened?
Well, I voted in favor of the bill to eliminate the Hollywood film credits. The governor's budget for 2015 included $50 million. You know, anybody familiar with what it costs to make a movie knows that $50 million is just a little drop in the bucket. And I made this point with my Republican colleagues the other day. My oldest son's name is Heston, because about 25 years ago, I worked directly with Charlton Heston, who was president of the Screen Actors Guild, with Morgan Paul, who was in Patton and Blade Runner, with Don Galloway, who used to be Sergeant Ed Brown, if you're old enough to remember, wheeling around Ironsides, with Rory Calhoun, who was in Tales from the Crypt, and before I was born, the Texan on TV in black and white. I mean, these are guys who were not only actors and involved in the Screen Actors Union, but had become producers and directors in their own right. And I was involved in working with all four of them in the passage of a right-to-work law in the state of Idaho back in the 1980s. We actually did a television commercial when that appeared on the ballot talking about what made a state attractive to Hollywood film producers. These were actors and producers who wanted to expand the sites that were available across the country, but they were not looking for a handout from the taxpayers. I said to my Republican colleagues that the fact that we made Michigan a right-to-work state, so that on a movie site or any other place of employment you're free to choose to join a union or not, that made Michigan far more attractive for Hollywood film site selections than a measly $50 million of tax credits. The Bureau of Labor Statistics indicates that over the last 7 years, I believe it is, after having spent $500 million in movie tax credits here in the state of Michigan, we have a net increase of 12 to 20 some new jobs. That's a lot of money to have produced no more jobs than there are. And there are other states that are spending far more. So the question is, should Michigan even be trying to win a bidding war? Why don't we just let our state be considered on the merits? That's the position I ended up taking. I voted in favor of eliminating the tax credit. Let's find out whether or not Michigan is a viable market in the free market for Hollywood film productions. I would argue that we do. We've got scenescapes that other states don't have. You know, I think there's been some success in some of the movies that have been shot in Michigan over the last 50 years. So I am willing to rely on the market to make Michigan attractive, our labor market, our scenescapes, instead of, you know, it's kind of hard to justify to taxpayers who are having a hard time getting by that we're going to give $50 million worth of tax credits to Hollywood movie producers. So I voted to eliminate it. That'll now go to the Senate. It's passed the House. The governor, we'll see what happens, but that's the position that I took. I tried to keep in mind, we had another bill that came up on the floor of the House today that basically you were deciding between justice and mercy in terms of sentencing and at what age someone could get leniency.
The Holmes Youthful
The
Training
Holmes
Act.
Youthful Training Act. And I went back, I was debating with myself about justice versus mercy. And then I took into account the possibility that in other portions of our state that crime was so bad that maybe you needed to provide for more leniency and allow older people as old as 24 or 25 to be considered minors. But the conclusion I finally came to was that for Midland and Bay counties, I thought the most important factor was people would want our communities to be kept safe. We are very blessed. We are, John, my family and I, and my constituents are very blessed to live in an area of our state that is very low crime. And so I finally came down on the side of justice, so to speak, of a strong law and order stand, because I thought the highest priority for the people that I represent would be to keep our community safe. And part of my responsibility is to protect that nice oasis that we are blessed to live in Midland and Bay County. So I came down on the side of what I thought was best for taxpayers and residents and families in the district that I represent. And that was the same judgment process I used to decide about whether or not we'd keep giving $50 million to Hollywood movie producers as well.
And is that maybe a reflection, too, representative of the type of job you have right now? Because maybe there are some cases where legitimate arguments could be made on both sides of an issue. But you have to look at the interests of your district first.
I concluded that whatever the arguments were, that on some of these bills that have come up, I should do what I think is best for Midland and Bay counties. So, the other side of an issue might be better for some areas of the rest of the state, but my job is to represent families in Bay County, in rural and western and northern Bay County, and in Midland City and the townships surrounding Midland City. So it's an instructive process as I work my way through it and have to vote on hundreds of bills on lots of different issues. But I am comfortable that I came down on what I believe to be best for the people of the district that I represent.
Let's talk about energy policy in Lansing, because right now that is a very important topic. It's going to be an important topic throughout the year. The chair of the House Energy Committee, Representative Eric Nesbitt, has introduced a package of legislation dealing with energy policy reforms. Governor Snyder is rolling out a statement, a message, dealing with energy policy. Actually, you yourself this week, as the vice chair of the House Energy Committee, took up the gavel and presided over a meeting where you talked about this issue. And suffice to say, for your district, really for all of Michigan, this is probably one of the more important issues lawmakers are going to be looking at during this current term of the legislature.
It is. It's not the front page type of issue that everybody knows about and has strong feelings about.
But it impacts a lot of people.
They want to make sure when they flip the switch, the light comes on.
Reliability.
Especially in our cold winter months. Reliability is certainly a question. Making sure that we have competitive rates. I attended a luncheon meeting about 2 weeks ago in which Dow Chemical CEO Andrew Liveris gave an address of some length, and he didn't mention energy except one time, but what he said I thought was pretty impactful. He said, we're going to continue to have operations in Midland because that's where our founding was. Herbert Dow founded Dow Chemical in Midland, Michigan. We're going to stay here. It's our heritage. But he said, if you want to know why some of the facilities we're locating in Houston aren't being located in Midland, he said, give us more competitive energy rates and you'll get them. Well, he didn't talk long about energy, but I got the message. This is an extremely important issue for Dow Chemical and Dow Corning and Hemlock Semiconductor and for Midland Cogeneration Venture. And tomorrow, I'm going to be spending 3 or 4 hours touring the Dow Chemical facilities and talking about this very thing. There are a lot of different elements in the new energy rewrite. Our energy policy expires this year. So I'm vice chairman of the House Energy Committee as a freshman, and we're going to be expected in the next 6 months to a year to completely rewrite the energy policy for the next decade. One of the key questions in that debate is going to be whether or not we allow people to continue to choose someone other, in our district, someone other than Consumers Energy as their provider, the electricity choice market, as opposed to those who have their electricity supplied by Consumers Energy. 2 significant things did happen this week in my role as vice chairman. As you indicated, the chairman of the committee, Representative Eric Nesbitt of Lawton, a fellow Republican, was introducing a package of bills, so he was out in front of us as a witness, testifying on behalf of his bills. And so for the first time as vice chairman, I went over and took the chairman's position and presided over the committee, and even asked our real chairman, I asked him a few questions, that required him to justify the position he was taking. And then just this morning, I was the only freshman lawmaker who was invited to a personal briefing by the governor. I was in a group with the Speaker of the House, Kevin Cotter, with Representative Nesbitt, who's chairman of the House Energy Committee, the Democratic leadership of the House, the leadership of the Senate, so there were 10 of us. I was the only freshman who got a personal briefing by the governor on what he plans to call for in his energy address. By the time this is on the air, it will have been last Friday. So that was certainly a gratifying opportunity. I am taking my leadership position on developing an energy policy very seriously. I'm on 3 other committees: tax policy, military and veterans affairs, and commerce and trade. I believe my experience so far is I can keep up with everything that's going on those other committees because I've been exposed to issues in each issue category on those before. The one that requires study to the point that I feel like a college student. I have a place I stay in Lansing on Tuesdays and Wednesday nights. I go back to that little apartment. I study. I read 2 to 3 hours of energy policy every night until I go to sleep. Usually the reaction I get to that is, well, that probably is 5 minutes. If you're reading about that complex energy stuff, you go to sleep in 5 minutes. But long enough to stay awake to learn something about it, because it's a very serious and sobering responsibility that is of immense value. Just as Andrew Liveris said, it will determine whether or not Midland County and Bay County are in the future the beneficiaries of potentially thousands of new jobs or retention of the jobs that we have in high-tech industries that are there now, who are major consumers of electricity. We have the highest residential electricity rates in the Midwest and 11th highest in the country. So this is a policy in which I approach it from the beginning from a free market perspective that says, if you want the best product at the best price, you have multiple providers and you let the consumers choose what they believe is best for them. The average homeowner may not pay all that much attention to how much energy costs, but I can guarantee you that Dow Chemical and Dow Corning have staff that are dedicated only to examining where they can get the cheapest source of energy. One of the surprising things in the testimony before the House Energy Committee, which I chaired the other day, and I didn't realize this and had not read about it or heard about it, but we had a witness come up for only about 5 minutes at the end representing, she was the business agent, business manager for the Clarkston Community School District. She said that her school district saves $350,000 a year by being able to buy electricity from an alternative provider other than DTE down in Oakland County, and that if our future energy policy were to force her to go back into the duopoly of consumers and DTE, that her district would have to lay off 5.5 teachers. Well, that was an enlightenment that I think many committee members weren't aware of, that we have public school districts. She said that the Oakland County Public Schools collectively save $3.36 million a year. And a man came up to us after the hearing, gave us his card. We're going to be talking to him more extensively, but he said he represented dozens of school districts in Michigan, and he claimed he had saved school districts $1 billion by being able to have the freedom to choose alternative energy providers other than the rates that are offered by consumers and DTE. So that's an element of the story, the fact that this may impact school districts. And certainly the legislature is somewhat sensitive to funding of school districts, increase in costs for school districts. And if we're talking about energy policy, perhaps adding millions, hundreds of millions of additional expenses to local school districts, I think that puts it in an entirely different light than a lot of us had thought before. So I'm interested in protecting the ability of our school districts. Frankly, I'd like to see more school districts able to choose an alternative provider or to choose DTE and consumers if that's the best deal at the best price. Our current policy caps at 10% of the customers in Michigan. Only 10% can choose an alternative provider. The other 90% are forced to be on the plan offered by consumers or DTE. We have a neighboring state of Ohio where people are completely free to choose from multiple providers. Anyway, that's going to be a major issue. And I had the benefit this morning of being able to be briefed personally by the governor on what he's planning to propose. You've got to get agreement from the House, the Senate, and the governor. It's going to be an interesting issue to follow over the course of the rest of the year.
In about the 4 minutes we have left, Representative, we should talk about the district a little bit. I know you have some local meetings coming up. We'll have those up on the screen, but people too will understand what we're talking about when we start to chat about the locker room situation at Planet Fitness.
Yes.
You yourself have said that in a conservative family community like Midland, that is something that's probably not going to fly, and it's actually a message that you've talked about across the state and across the country.
Yeah, my wife was a member of that Planet Fitness, and since my son's basketball season is coming to an end, she was planning to go back and re-up her membership at Planet Fitness. But as she told me, she believes Planet Fitness has now made clear it's not a family-friendly environment. She will not be going back. There have been news stories across the country in just the last couple of days that Planet Fitness is losing memberships across the country because of this policy. And what you had was a woman who had been a member of Planet Fitness in Midland for 2 months and was in the locker room, the women's locker room and shower, and was shocked to find a man in the women's locker room at Planet Fitness. She complained to the management and then talked to other female members of Planet Fitness about her concern of this man being in the women's locker room. Was told that because the man claimed to believe he was a woman, that he was allowed to use the women's locker room. And so the woman who was concerned and alarmed about a man being in the women's locker room, her membership in Planet Fitness was revoked. She was the one that was not allowed to be in the women's locker room or in the facility at all because she had raised a concern and shared her concern with other female members. This is an unusual issue in that you have lesbian activists, lesbian attorneys who believe allowing men who claim to believe they're female in women's locker rooms are wrong. Michigan's current law says that locker rooms and showers may be segregated by sex. The legislature could address the issue and change the word, just one word, may to shall. But I think our top concern should be to protect the peace of mind, the comfort, the security, certainly the safety of women. And even one of the lesbian activist groups here in Michigan, their executive director said that she had been receiving lots of mail from, as she termed it, angry lesbians who were saying that these kind of policies threaten to make women's spaces unsafe and make women unsafe. So on this particular issue, it's not women, not just women in general, but even lesbian women who agree that women shouldn't be forced to share locker rooms and showers with men. That's a pretty common sense policy, and I did not hesitate to speak up in support of the woman who thought her privacy, her sense of comfort and security was violated at Planet Fitness. I wish they'd change the policy. If they don't, as is apparently the case, they shouldn't be surprised not only if they lose more members in a family-friendly community like Midland, but according to media reports, apparently they're losing membership now all across America.
Finally, Representative, as we go through March, you are out in the district meeting with constituents. We'll have that up on the screen as we close, but obviously that's a key part of your job.
Well, and we're just starting to put together these community meeting hours. We're going to be in set locations at set times every Friday of each week throughout the month, throughout my service. So if somebody wants to come and meet personally with me and talk about an issue of concern, we'll be advertising where they can do that, and I'll look forward to meeting with folks who I can help, hopefully, with any matter regarding our state government.
Okay. Representative, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.